The secret under the stage lights. The air in Midtown Manhattan, even in the sterile confines of the law office, always felt electric, charged with ambition and desperation. That's the oxygen I breathed. At 40, I was Elena Voss, a director, a builder of worlds on the New York stage. Broadway wasn't just a career. It was the bloodstream running from my childhood dreams in Queens, right into the beating heart of the theater district. Asterisk shadows of the soul times that was my baby. 10 years of my life poured onto paper, honed in countless rewrites, sweat, and midnight arguments. It wasn't just a play. It was the architecture of my soul, and the lead role, the tormented artist battling her own shadow self, was written for Isabella, my twin. We were identical right down to the slight upturn of the left eyebrow when we concentrated. People often mistook us across a crowded room, but the division was always clear. I was the engine, the brain behind the curtain. She was the face, the effortless beauty who commanded the spotlight. We needed each other, or so I thought. 48 hours before opening night, the culmination of everything, I walked into Mr. Henderson's office. The mahogany desk gleamed under the recessed lighting, a cold, judgmental surface. He slid a document across it. "Miss Voss," he began. His voice clipped and entirely devoid of warmth. "I regret to inform you that the ownership rights to Time's Shadows of the Soul Times have been fully transferred to Harlan Productions." My fingers brushed the thick paper. My signature stared back at me. My looping, decisive E.V. The penmanship was flawless, except I hadn't signed it. A cold nausea, sharper than any stage fright, gripped me. "That's impossible, Mr. Henderson. I haven't authorized any transfer." He sighed, adjusting his tie. "The documents are notarized, Miss Voss. Signed, sealed, and registered. Harlan Productions is now the controlling entity. They have assumed the lease on the theater and are moving forward with a new director tonight." The world tilted. Harlan Productions. That was Ryan's company. Ryan, my producer, my anchor, the man I planned to marry. I didn't wait for further explanation. I fled the office. The polished marble floors of the building suddenly slippery beneath my expensive heels. Every step was a sprint toward the inevitable confrontation. Backstage at the Lyric Theater was pandemonium, but I ignored the stagehands and rushed straight to Isabella's dressing room. The door was ajar. She was sitting at her vanity, applying a final, perfect slash of crimson lipstick, watching my reflection in the mirror. She didn't flinch when I entered. "You look frantic, Elle," she said, her voice smooth as silk, meeting my eyes in the glass. "The contract, Izzy." "What did you do?" My voice was ragged tight with disbelief. She capped her lipstick, finally turning to face me. Her eyes, my eyes, held a chilling lack of remorse. "I filed the paperwork 3 months ago. I had you sign stack after stack of standard release forms for revisions. You never look at the fine print when you're directing, do you? You're too busy being the visionary." The air rushed out of my lungs. Betrayal, real betrayal, wasn't something you could write into a script. It was something that punched you in the gut and stole your breath. "You stole it," I whispered. "I claimed what was rightfully mine," she corrected, standing up. She was taller in her heels, commanding the small space. "You wrote the soul, Elena, but I times am times the soul they pay to see. Harlan and Ryan understood that dynamic better than you ever did." I looked past her, searching the doorway. Ryan stood there, his face pale, leaning against the jamb. He was supposed to be my partner in everything, the visionary and the businessman. "Ryan," I asked. The sound catching. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He just nodded curtly towards Isabella. "It's done, Elena. Harlan bought out the rights legally. We need to move forward with the current production schedule." The world didn't just tilt this time. It shattered. Ryan, my future, had stood by and watched my twin steal my life's work. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did what I always did. When faced with annihilation, I assessed the damage and secured the evidence. My laptop bag was slung over my shoulder. While Isabella was busy admiring herself, I slipped behind a rack of costumes. I didn't have time to download everything, but I remembered the clandestine security footage I'd set up in the production office months ago just in case. I furiously plugged a spare USB drive into the back of my secondary monitor, copying the file labeled Suspicious Signatures, February. I heard the door slam shut moments later. Security was escorting me out. "You can't do this, Isabella." "I have proof of fraud," I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the theater's echoing halls. "You have a bad memory, Elle," she called after me, her voice amplified by the tilework. And no theater. I walked out into the unforgiving New York twilight, the air instantly freezing against my flushed skin. My only suitcase, the one containing the pristine, now useless first edition script of Times, Shadows of the Soul Times, was waiting by the stage door. As I pulled it, the cheap fabric ripped near the handle, the bound pages spilling onto the pavement. I didn't stop to gather them. I just scooped up the mess, stuffed the shredded script back in, and hailed a cab heading west. I left New York that night, leaving behind the theater, the ambition, the man I loved, and the sister I thought I knew. I took only the ripped script, the empty space where my career used to be, and a heart that felt like pulverized glass. Chicago was cold, a biting wind that seemed designed to scrub the residual gloss of New York ambition right off your skin, but the cold was a blessing. Here, nobody knew Elena Voss, the supposed prodigy who'd imploded before opening night. Here, I was just another face looking for a foothold. I found a cramped, cold apartment near the lakefront, but my real sanctuary was the Windy City Playhouse. It was everything Broadway wasn't chipped. Paint sagging, velvet seats, and a ghost of desperation clinging to the dusty curtains. The audiences were sparse, mostly theater students, and the deeply loyal few who still believed in live performance over spectacle. I took directing jobs for whatever they paid, small one-act revivals nobody else wanted. I was stripping away the ego, learning to create art with nothing but grit and shadows. Months bled into months. I channeled the emptiness, the searing rage into the work. I directed with a quiet ferocity, forcing my actors to find truth in silence, because I couldn't afford grand gestures. Then came the rain. A relentless, dreary Chicago downpour that seemed determined to flood the rehearsal room one Tuesday evening. I was mapping out blocking for a tired Chekhov adaptation when the door creaked open. He stood silhouetted against the dim hallway light. Tall, with that wonderful, chaotic look of someone whose mind moves faster than their grooming habits allow. His dark hair was perpetually damp, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of aged whiskey, burning with an internal restless fire. "I heard you might need a playwright," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the drumming rain. He dropped a thick manuscript onto the folding table, nudging aside my coffee-stained notes. The cover read Times Echoes of Betrayal **. I picked it up. It felt heavy, real. I flipped to the synopsis. Two sisters bound by blood, torn apart by ambition, one using the other as a stepping stone to fame. The parallels were so precise, so agonizingly mirrored to my own life, that I felt a sharp intake of breath, as if I'd been punched by a ghost. "Who are you?" I asked, unable to look away from the text. "Daniel Kane," he replied simply. And that he pointed to the pages is the most honest thing written about sibling rivalry and professional jealousy in a decade. It needs a director who understands that kind of wound. I looked up at him, seeing past the damp coat and the chaotic hair to the intelligence burning underneath. This wasn't a grant application. This was a lifeline coated in salt water. "We're doing this," I stated the directorial authority, returning to my voice for the first time in a year. "But we're doing it my way. Independent. No investors chasing profits. No producers selling out the vision. Just us, the truth, and this stage." Daniel looked at the dingy room, then back at me, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Sounds like my kind of betrayal, Elena. Let's burn it down." We plunged into the work. Daniel's dialogue was surgical, dissecting layers of pretense with brutal honesty. My direction became a translation of my own trauma, We used the sparse set design as a weapon. The shadows stretching across the stage weren't just shadows, they were the lingering deception. The single harsh work light wasn't poor lighting, it was the unflinching gaze of judgment. We worked until dawn most days. In the brief pauses between scenes fueled by lukewarm coffee, the dynamic shifted. Daniel had a way of seeing the light behind the scar tissue. One particularly grueling afternoon, Maya, the actress playing the betrayed sister, collapsed after a particularly raw monologue. As the paramedics checked her over, I stood paralyzed, convinced this was some cosmic curse on anything I touched. Daniel found me leaning against a cold brick wall, my breath catching in shallow gasps. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just wrapped his arms around me, pulling me tight against the solidness of his chest. I buried my face in the damp wool of his coat. "You don't need Broadway to shine, Elena," he murmured into my hair, his voice steadying my tremor. "You times are times the light." That simple, uncomplicated acknowledgement from a stranger who saw my truth faster than my own family was more powerful than any standing ovation. Asterisk echoes of Betrayal times opened quietly, almost reluctantly at the Playhouse. Then the magic happened. A major arts blogger posted a clip of the final scene raw, unedited, just actors on a bare stage on TikTok. It went viral. People dissected the dialogue on X. The word of mouth was immediate and fierce. Audiences who hadn't set foot in a theater in years bought tickets. We sold out weeks in advance, based purely on the intensity of the performance. Critics called it a raw, necessary piece of modern tragedy. The calls started flooding in. Major reviews, agents sniffing around. And then the one that made my stomach clench, an invitation to bring Time's echoes, Times to Broadway. The very theater Isabella had stolen from me was offering us a prime slot. I was wary. Success draws the vultures. The sabotage happened 2 weeks before the scheduled transfer. I arrived at the Playhouse one morning to find chaos. The entire lighting grid had been deliberately overloaded. Several crucial gel frames were melted. Shattered pieces of custom-made glass props, meant to represent broken trust, were strewn across the stage floor. The police found security footage. A shadowy figure, moving with practiced speed, their posture hauntingly familiar, obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a cloth mask, a mask suspiciously similar to the ones Isabella wore in her more avant-garde photo shoots. The narrative, even in Chicago, was swift and brutal. The tabloids, alerted by anonymous sources, ran headlines: "Broadway bombshell, Elena Voss self-sabotages success out of jealousy." Isabella predictably fueled the fire on social media, posting cryptic messages about fragile egos and how some people just can't handle being second best even when they're directing. I felt the familiar, crushing weight of doubt. Maybe I couldn't escape the shadow. Maybe this was my destiny, to be perpetually undermined by the one person who shared my face. I retreated, ready to tell Daniel we should pull the plug. He found me huddled over the wreckage of the stage set, breathing heavily. He didn't judge the fear in my eyes. He simply walked over, picked up a shard of glass that looked suspiciously like the props from Time's Shadows of the Soul Times, and placed it carefully on the prop table. Then he took both my hands, his grip firm and grounding. "They want you to crumble, Elle. They want you to believe their narrative. Don't you dare give them the satisfaction of seeing you quit. They tried to destroy the work. Now we make the work so bright, it blinds them." We rebuilt. We replaced the props, reinforced the grid, and hired a private security detail. We were tougher now. We had something real to protect. Broadway waited. I knew the moment I stepped back onto that stage, even as a director, I would have to face the ghost of my past. The air backstage at the Nederlander Theater, the theater where Time's Shadows of the Soul Times was supposed to have premiered, was thick with the scent of new paint, nervous energy, and expensive hairspray. It was opening night for Time's Echoes of Betrayal *. My heart hammered a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I stood in the cramped technical booth watching my creation unfold on the monitors. Maya, my lead, was phenomenal. She inhabited the role with a heartbreaking vulnerability that felt like a confession whispered into a million ears. The audience was rapt. Daniel was beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a silent source of strength. "She's perfect, Elena," he whispered as the second act closed. "She is," I agreed, but my focus was already shifting. The third act was the climax, the moment of revelation, and the scene where my counterpart, the betrayer, finally collapses under the weight of her actions. Minute 75. Maya was delivering the crucial monologue about fractured reflection. I watched the monitor feed from the wings. Suddenly, Maya stumbled, clutching her side, her face losing all color. "Maya, down code red." The stage manager's voice hissed through my headset, laced with panic. "What happened?" I demanded, already scrambling out of the booth, Daniel grabbing my arm. She collapsed mid-scene. "Paramedics are on their way. Looks like poisoning, maybe." Before I could formulate a response, another more familiar voice cut through the headset channel, loud, sharp, and utterly authoritative. "This is Elena Voss. I am instructing the house manager to immediately halt the performance. Cancel the show. Tell the press there is a medical emergency involving the lead." My blood turned to ice. That wasn't my voice issuing the cancellation order. It was an impersonation, a directive, designed to cause chaos and make Me Times look responsible for the disaster. "That's not me," I snapped into the mic. "It sounds exactly like you, Director Voss," the house manager replied, clearly confused. I broke into a dead sprint. Shoes slipped on the polished floor of the access corridor. I ran past bewildered crew members, my mind racing. Cancel the show. Sabotage the lead actress. This was a setup designed to mirror the narrative of Time's echoes of betrayal. Time's the betrayer taking down the victim right at the peak of echoes. Success. I reached the main wing just as the doors to the stage opened, spilling a blinding white light onto the empty space where Maya had just stood. There she was, Isabella, dressed head to toe in matte black stage technician gear, topped with a baseball cap pulled low. But the hair beneath was wrong, a cheap wig styled exactly like my preferred severe bun. She was shouting into a production mic held close to her lips, her voice loud enough to carry to the first few rows. "I am Elena Cancel. The performance immediately medical emergency." She was actively dismantling my show in front of 1800 people. I didn't stop to think about protocol or decorum. I ripped off my headset and threw it onto a lighting trunk. I charged through the heavy velvet curtain divider, separating the wings from the stage, emerging into the harsh glare of the stage lights like a specter. The theater went silent. The audience, already confused by Maya's abrupt departure, gasped as they saw two identical women standing on stage, one furious, one masquerading. I didn't use the mic. I didn't need amplification. My voice, honed by years of commanding armies of actors and technicians, sliced through the hush. "I am the real Elena Voss," I stated, planting my feet center stage, my gaze locked onto Isabella. I pointed a rigid finger at my twin. "That woman is an imposter. This is my play. My vision. It was stolen from me once. It will not be stolen a second time." Isabella froze her eyes, widening behind the dark brim of the cap. The planned narrative of my mental breakdown was collapsing around her. I spun away from her, ignoring the frantic whispers of the stage manager who had followed me out. I knelt beside the unconscious Maya, who was now being gently moved by the medical team. I checked her pulse, whispered reassurances. She managed a weak nod. I stood up, turning back to the audience, feeling the heat of thousands of eyes, the glow of countless phone screens, already live-streaming the confrontation. Isabella made a break for the curtain, trying to flee into the darkness of the wings, but two large security guards hired by Daniel after the Chicago incident intercepted her firmly. I took a deep breath, stepping fully into the blinding white light. No script, no notes, just the truth raw and exposed. The final monologue I announced to the stunned crowd, my voice steadying as the adrenaline coalesced into purpose. The one meant for the role of the betrayed sister the one who finally finds her own voice. I will perform it myself. I walked to center stage, pulling the fabric of the black technician's jumpsuit Isabella had abandoned off my shoulders. Underneath, I wore a simple black dress, the costume I'd originally designed for the second act of Times, Shadows of the Soul *. A deep, resonant irony. I began the words flowing not from memory but from the core of my survival. I once stood where you are now, I said, looking out over the sea of faces, believing that my identity was tied to the applause, to the validation of the one person who held my heart. I learned in the cold, hard way that when you let someone else hold the mirror, you risk seeing only the reflection they times you to be. I spoke about the phantom limb syndrome of creation, the agony of watching your work worn by someone else. I spoke about Ryan's quiet betrayal, Isabella's calculated malice, and the sheer terror of being erased. I was told that ambition consumes you, that betrayal breaks you. I continued, my voice gaining power, resonating off the ornate ceiling, but they failed to understand the fundamental law of theater. Adversity isn't the end of the scene. It's the catalyst for the second act. I paced the stage, using the entire space, channeling every 10 years of suppressed anger and rebirth. Betrayal did not kill me. It didn't reduce me to ash. It stripped away the dependency, the need for approval. It forced me to look past the beautiful false face in the mirror and find the architect underneath. I stopped directly under the main work light, letting the searing intensity wash over me. My sister wanted my light. My lover wanted to control my narrative. But tonight, I realized the light on this stage, the raw, dangerous, unpredictable illumination it belongs to, the one who can endure it, the one who knows how to rewrite the ending. I ended not with a shout, but with a quiet, absolute conviction. Suffering did not destroy me. It simply made me incandescent. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. It lasted an agonizing 5 seconds. Then, the sound began. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar, a wave of sound that shook the foundation of the theater. People were standing, cell phones held aloft, streaming the impromptu performance to the world. It lasted, Daniel later told me, 7 solid minutes before the general manager could finally wrestle control back to signal the end of the night. As the blinding white lights swept over the stage for the final curtain call, Isabella was being led out of the wings by 2 grim-faced officers, her face contorted, not in defeat, but in utter raw incomprehension. She couldn't process the failure of her final performance. I stood there with Daniel and Maya basking in the ovation. It wasn't for Times, Echoes of Betrayal Times anymore. It was for Elena Voss. 6 months had passed. The adrenaline of the confrontation had been replaced by the steady hum of success. Echoes of Betrayal Times became the must-see show of the season. Critics lauded the director's courageous decision to step in during crisis, conveniently overlooking the fact that the crisis was manufactured by my own kin. I was standing backstage at the Minskoff Theater, clutching the heavy golden weight of the Tony Award for Best Director. It felt surprisingly substantial. Daniel was next to me, radiating quiet pride. We had decided to keep the show anchored in Chicago for the extended run, only moving the critical pieces to Broadway for the awards season. We found our quiet, powerful success on the shores of Lake Michigan, and that's where we kept our real home, a modest but stunning penthouse overlooking the icy expanse of Lake Michigan. It was 3 a.m. The city was finally quiet, a deep, exhausted slumber. We were drifting off the Tony, sitting on the mantel like a strange, shining totem, when the persistent, jarring sound of the doorbell shattered the peace. Who would be here at this hour? Daniel mumbled, already sitting up. I frowned, pulling on a silk robe. I checked the security feed on my bedside monitor. No one was visible on the exterior cameras. Yet the chime sounded again, a desperate, insistent ring. I walked to the door, checking the peephole. Nothing. Hesitantly, I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack. Nothing. Except for a thick black envelope resting squarely on the Persian rug of our foyer. It was heavy, the paper expensive, the kind of stationery one used when they needed to appear sophisticated while attempting something dramatic. I picked it up. Inside, there were 2 items. The first was a note written in looping, frantic handwriting, stained slightly with what looked like dried ink or perhaps rust. It was signed I. My dearest LU1, every single time you always win the audience. But I can't live in the shadow of your spotlight anymore. Not like this. If you do not grant me forgiveness, a true public erasure of the past, I will jump from the Brooklyn Bridge at 5 a.m. sharp. You have until then. My hands trembled not with fear for her, but with a weary recognition of the performance. It was classic. Isabella always escalating, always threatening the ultimate irreversible act to force an emotional reaction. The second item was a small unlabeled USB stick, attached with clear packing tape. Daniel was wide awake now, standing behind me, his voice sharp and immediate. Elena, don't read it. That's a trap. It's always a trap, Daniel. I ignored him for a second, my eyes fixed on the black envelope. Forgiveness. The currency she always demanded. I plugged the USB stick into my secure laptop. It opened instantly. It wasn't a manifesto or an apology. It was a video file. The footage was dark, shaky, clearly filmed on a cheap phone. It showed Isabella, standing precariously on the metal structure of the Brooklyn Bridge walkway. The wind whipped her clothes around her. She was sobbing hysterically, leaning over the guardrail toward the black water below. I only ever wanted you to love me, Elle, she screamed into the mic, her voice cracking with manufactured despair. I just wanted to be Times, you Times. If you can't forgive me, then I can't live with myself. She let go. Her body tumbled out over the edge. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the sickening silence of the fall. But the silence never came. Instead, a loud mechanical Times clunk Times echoed through the video. Isabella's body snapped back upward, violently arrested midair by taut, nearly invisible wires connected to a harness hidden beneath her oversized coat. She swung briefly, dangling before being swiftly hauled back over the railing by 2 figures in dark utility uniforms who then quickly pulled off her wig and mask. It was a staged suicide. A final, desperate, manipulative performance designed to force me to choose between my success and her life, a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Daniel was beside me, instantly watching the playback with horrified clarity. It's theater, Elle. It's always theater with her. She hired stunt coordinators, probably using the last of the money Harlan gave her to stage this impossible exit. I nodded slowly, the tension draining out of me replaced by a cold, hard resolution. She hadn't counted on me having the emotional distance to analyze the scene objectively rather than react blindly. I looked at the video one more time, memorizing the faces of the men who secured the harness. I didn't call the NYPD in New York. I called the Chicago Police Department, explaining the evidence of attempted fraud blackmail and the coordinated staging of a highly publicized suicide attempt, all of which could be traced back to Harlan Productions' initial fraudulent buyout. I sent the USB drive via encrypted transfer to my lawyers, attaching the video as Exhibit A, in the ongoing legal battle to reclaim the rights to Time's Shadows of the Soul asterisk. The next morning, the news feeds were dominated by a different headline: Elena Voss, arrested for staging suicide attempt, alleged connection to Broadway fraud case. The elaborate performance had failed spectacularly. I walked over to my desk, opened the bottom drawer labeled Past, and looked at the shredded script of Time's Shadows of the Soul Times lying there. I picked up the note Isabella had left the one demanding forgiveness. I crumpled it slowly, deliberately, until it was a tight, dry ball. I tossed it into the waste bin. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something you gave someone else so you could sleep better. It wasn't about reconciliation or returning to the way things were. Forgiveness was a closure I owed myself, not her. I walked to the large picture window overlooking Lake Michigan. The sun was rising over the water, painting the horizon in shades of rose and sharp gold. It was a Chicago sunrise, fierce, clean, and utterly unsentimental. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What now, director?" he asked softly. I turned my face slightly to meet his gaze. "Forgiveness isn't about inviting the person back into your life," I said, watching the light catch the water. "Forgiveness is realizing that they no longer have the power to destroy you. It's refusing to let her sabotage my next act." I leaned back into his warmth, feeling the solid reality of him, a foundation, built on honesty, not ambition. Under the clear new sky, there were no more ghosts waiting in the wings. I am Elena Voss. I lost everything, my play, my lover, my sister, my name. I took it all back with my own 2 hands, not by reclaiming what was lost, but by building something stronger in the wreckage. Under the lights of the stage, I don't just shine anymore. I command the darkness. And I will keep shining forever.